this session. So thank you for your attention and your patience. So my name is Larry Olamofe, and I am the advisor for combating racism and xenophobia and intolerance against Christians at the Tolerance and Non-Discrimination Department here in O'Dare. And I'd like to welcome you to session 9, which is the next session that we're about to engage upon. I'd like to remind you as the purpose and the scope of this session, which is designed to discuss how education can support an appreciation for cultural and religious diversity. The session will also explore measures states have taken to promote mutual respect and understanding, and examine initiatives to train teachers and to address intolerance and challenge stereotypes through human rights education. This session will also analyze effective educational methodologies, teaching materials, and extracurricular activities that address intolerance and discrimination. It will also provide an opportunity to explore how media, the internet, and particularly digital literacy can promote human rights and tolerance. I stress this simply because with other sessions, participants are reminded that contributions from the floor should really be within the parameters of the session and the purpose of the session. For more information on this particular session, I would also refer you to consult the annotated agenda and understand, in a sense, the scope of the session. I would like to take this opportunity to stress that we have the speakers list, and we have 28 speakers so far. I think we will close the speakers list for now. So if you haven't signed up to it, could you please do so in the next 2 or 3 minutes? Because of this, we will also have at some point 3 minutes per contribution after the introduction by our introducers. To this now I will turn. We have 2 introducers for the session this afternoon. The first introducer is Ms. Sarah Soye, and she is the Executive Director of Equaltech Teach, a not-for-profit equality and diversity training and consultancy organization working in educational settings across the United Kingdom. Sarah has been working in the field of human rights and equality in education for over 14 years. She has overseen the development and delivery of educational programs which have been delivered to over 300,000 young people, and works in partnership with senior leaders to ensure schools effectively promote equality and tackle discrimination, creating inclusive settings where every pupil is able to achieve. Sarah has written extensively on human rights issues, including contributing to the international guidelines on countering intolerance towards Muslims with UNESCO and ODARE. She's co-written Universal Values, a value education resource for teachers and for teachers union, the NSUWT, which I will not actually try and unpack for you, and publishing research into the barriers to tackling racism in England's schools for educational charity Show Racism, the Red Card. Our other introducer to my left is Mr. Mark Weitzman. He is the Director of Government Affairs for the Simon Wiesenthal Center and the Chief Representative of the Simon Wiesenthal Center to the United Nations in New York. Mr. Weitzman is a member of the official United States delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, where he is the past chair of the Committee on Anti-Semitism and Holocaust Denial. He spearheaded IHRA's recent adoption of the working definition of anti-Semitism, which is the first definition of anti-Semitism with any formal status, and was the lead author of the working definition of Holocaust denial and distortion, which has also been adopted by the 31 member countries of IHRA. He co-chairs the Working Group on International Affairs of the Global Forum on Anti-Semitism and is a participant in the Program of Religion and Foreign Policy of the Council on Foreign Relations. Mr. Weitzman is a winner of the 2007 National Jewish Book Award for Best Anthology and Anti-Semitism, the Generic Hatred Essays in Memory of Simon Wiesenthal, which he co-edited and contributed to, and which has appeared in French, Spanish, and Russian language editions. I will now give the floor to our first introducer, Sarah, and I believe she has a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation as well. So thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Just see if the magic. Thank you very much again. So, good afternoon, everybody. During my presentation, I'm going to explore countering intolerance and discrimination against Muslims in schools. As has been mentioned, I'm one of the founders and directors of a not-for-profit equality and diversity training and consultancy organisation that works in schools and colleges throughout England. I have been doing this for 14 years, and during that time, I've worked with thousands of young people and teachers, right from the south coast in Plymouth up to the north coast in Northumberland, which also means I spend a lot of my life on trains. If we're looking at the issues that we're talking about today, studies have demonstrated that intolerance, discrimination and hate crimes against Muslims are on the rise across Europe. If we're looking at the refugee movement, the turmoil that's created, the unprecedented rise of far-right parties and backlash from Islamist-inspired terrorist attacks have perhaps contributed to this trend. If we look within the UK, the EU referendum polarised some parts of British society, with a minority of people considering the vote was a rejection of multiculturalism and immigration. And therefore, racial and religiously motivated hate crimes have increased in the UK 23% in the 12 months since the vote. So in this climate, the sensationalist and perhaps misleading reporting about Muslim communities in the mainstream media, as some of the covers illustrate on the slide, are contributing to this rising hostility. And young people are not immune from this. Childline, which is a helpline for young people in the UK, has reported that prejudice against Muslims is a particular issue in schools, with young Muslims and those perceived to be Muslim reporting they're being called terrorists and bombers by classmates. And we also witness this in our work. Before we go and work with young people in a school, we ask them to complete a questionnaire so that we can tailor workshops to their needs. And the comment on the slide you can see is a sample from one of the questionnaires that was completed this year. You know, every single day someone comments rudely about me and where I come from. Some people make fun of girls' headscarves. I don't wear one, but it's still offensive because it's from my religion and my friends and family wear it. What's the point of coming to school? Sometimes I feel like crying. It's 2017, grow up and learn respect. Please come in and talk about it. And so you can see that these kind of prejudice and discrimination can have a very negative effect on the lives of young Muslims. It can lead to a lack of self-esteem, low confidence, and impact on people's sense of belonging. And some pupils have reported as normalised. There's no point in reporting, nothing will get done. You know, only reporting things perhaps if they're particularly violent hate crimes. Now, the education system can't be expected to eliminate intolerance against Muslims alone because it pervades social and political structures. But schools are uniquely placed to influence young people's understanding of prejudice and counter misinformation and stereotypes. Within the UK education system, we have several legal drivers which place statutory duties on schools to engage with these issues. If we look, the Equality Act 2010 requires schools to not only eliminate discrimination, but to foster good relations between people who share a relevant protected characteristic and those that do not. Our Education Act from 2007 requires schools to promote community cohesion, to ensure that pupils understand and appreciate others from different backgrounds. A more controversial act, perhaps, the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act came in 2015. And sometimes where there's been a lack of training, it has led to an unfair focus on Muslim pupils. But its stated intention is to combat all forms of extremism and encourage schools to create safe spaces to discuss controversial and sensitive issues. So harnessed correctly, it can support schools to undertake work on countering intolerance against Muslims. And we have this duty to promote young people's spiritual, moral, social and cultural development, which has been around since 2002. This was changed in 2014 to add the idea of promoting fundamental British values. When this came in, it led to the key question by many, many people of, well, what are fundamental British values? Some teachers and schools have been confused by the duty, and that's led to some schools putting up Union Jacks, celebrating the Queen, putting forward stereotypes about Britain in an attempt to meet the duty. However, the values have been defined by the government as democracy, rule of law, individual liberty, and mutual respect and tolerance of those with different faiths and beliefs, which provides a platform for constructive values education. And we have worked to produce a resource that we've called Universal Values to support school to meet this duty in a cohesive fashion. However, despite these drivers, there are many barriers, which mean that many young people have never had the opportunity to discuss issues of tolerance and discrimination in a formal setting. The first barrier that many teachers cite is lack of time. In a packed curriculum with an overstretched workload, issues of equality can sometimes seem peripheral. Many teachers lack the knowledge and confidence to broach the issues. In research that I conducted, only 35% of teachers had received any training in issues of tackling prejudice, promoting equality and human rights. And of those who had, most felt it was cursory and it hadn't equipped them to deal with issues. Teachers may be genuinely unaware of issues, as children as young as 4 become aware that perhaps there are some things they shouldn't express in front of teachers. And as I've already mentioned, pupils on the receiving end are sometimes wary of reporting it for being dismissed or making things worse. Teachers themselves are not immune from misinformation and prejudice. They've grown up in a system where there are structural inequalities for religious minorities and may not be able to see the barriers faced by Muslim pupils and staff if they don't affect them. And there can be this idea that if there are few or no Muslim children in the school, then Muslim intolerance is not an issue that the school needs to deal with. However, in schools such as these, young people are more prone to picking up misinformation and of it going unchallenged. So effective social justice education is based on human rights, actively encouraging the participation of young people and empowering them to be active citizens who are able to reject stereotypes and misinformation, understand the impact of discrimination and actively challenge prejudice. And by actively challenging the beliefs and attitudes that underlie hate crimes, schools can reduce incidents of hate crime and increase inclusion and belonging. Values, though, are highly personal and they're core to our understanding of the world, so they can't be imposed externally. Educating young people to promote tolerance and anti-discrimination requires a participatory approach in partnership with the learner, which involves questioning of evidence so the learner can come to their own evidence-based conclusions. So what does good practice look like? Engaging with the local community, with parents and carers, can help schools strengthen their knowledge base and provide different perspective on the issue. Young people are absolutely brimming with questions and opinions on these issues and want to have these conversations. Schools need to provide young people with the opportunity to bring their questions, concerns and experiences forward. There are some questions that we've had on the slide here. Young people won't open up about their opinions and fears if they worry they're going to be judged, laughed at or told off. So it's vital to create a safe space within which all pupils feel respected and able to take part. This can be done through the creation of ground rules. If we look at some other examples of good practice, human rights provide a strong framework within which this work can sit. And the Rights Respecting School Award is an initiative run by UNICEF UK, which encourages schools to place the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child at the heart of its ethos and curriculum. Over 600 schools in the UK have signed up to this and have achieved or are working towards the school. Engaging with school linking can be an excellent way to provide pupils with opportunities to learn and socialise with those from different faith and cultural backgrounds. Rather than linking with a school in Zambia or India, as traditionally happened, schools are finding that actually connecting a small rural primary school with a larger city school just 5 or 10 miles up the road can reap huge rewards in building understanding. But in order for schools to effectively counter Muslim intolerance, it's not enough just to run one-off initiatives with pupils. Research has shown that in schools where incidents of anti-Muslim prejudice and hate crime are low, they have a clear set of inclusive values which run through their policies and practice, and which staff and pupils can articulate. There's respect for individual differences, and pupils develop empathy and take responsibility for trying to prevent discrimination. Schools need this robust, centralised system to record anti-Muslim incidents and hate crime, overseen by the senior management team, so there's a holistic response to incidents. By increasing the reporting of hate crime and support for victims, schools can enable pupils to feel confident to report, ensure they don't go undetected, and build up an accurate picture of what's happening. There's lots of good work going on in schools across Europe, but there's not a consistent approach. And even in schools that are undertaking excellent work, this could be centred around one passionate individual and can fall apart if this person leaves. So my final slide just outlines some approaches governments can take to help mainstream good practice and better support schools to undertake this work. Ensuring that teacher training programmes provide teachers with training on human rights education to give them the confidence to work on these issues. Adopting policy that's underpinned by social justice and not allowing false negative media discourse to dominate debate. Clear guidance and training when new duties come in which might impact on tolerance and inclusion. And ensuring that any school inspectors are well trained, so they're looking for them and these issues are integral to inspections. Only when there's a whole school and societal approach to tackling discrimination and promoting mutual respect and understanding will we be truly ensuring that our schools provide safe spaces where all of our young people feel safe and able to achieve. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sarah, for this. So now I'll give the mic to Mr. Weissman to give us his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be a little bit more, if Sarah was a little granular, I'm going to take a little bit of an overall perspective or look. Following the 2004 Berlin Declaration, we have seen what one scholar described as a, quote, increase in Holocaust commemoration days after 2000, many of which are held on 27 January. These 27 January commemorations have become an extremely important moment of civic performance in Europe, creating an event that combine the European countries together in a celebration of shared values that transcend individual national concerns. Another scholar has added that the fundamental ties that bind Europe together today are based on, and I quote, a general agreement that the murder of 6 million Jews should turn into a common memory on which the values of a civil society could be built and minorities could be protected as a European commitment and orientation, thus creating it as a foundational moment in modern Europe. However, today we find both a common memory and those values to be controversial. As we all know, Europe is developing rifts and fissures that threaten to tear apart the ties that bind. And as history has often demonstrated, while majorities could feel threatened, it is minorities who face the greatest risk. Historically in Europe, it is Jews who have paid the price, culminating in the Holocaust. The post-war creation of international bodies like the United Nations, the EU, OSCE, etc., were supposed to be part of the antidote that would prevent any reoccurrence. But today, as the physical presence of the survivors and those who lived through that period recedes, we are increasingly faced with the paradox of increased formal national commemorations of the Holocaust at the same time that the historical narrative of what is being commemorated is increasingly under attack from a discourse of distortion. Holocaust distortion is not the outright denial that lurks in the neo-Nazi or radical anti-Zionist fringes, but is rather the position that pays lip service to the reality of the Holocaust, but tries to evade accepting any amount of responsibility for political reasons. It is history in defense of extreme nationalism. As the historian Timothy Snyder recently wrote, quote, post-truth is pre-fascism. In countries today, like Poland and Hungary, laws that threaten Holocaust scholars and survivors with imprisonment for publishing historically accurate but politically unpopular opinions, statutes that venerate Nazi-era collaborators, anti-Semitic writers who are inserted into one state curriculum, and attempts to remove teaching about death camps from another state curriculum, exaggerating the impact of the rescuers, and minimizing the number of the victims, are all forms of Holocaust distortion that have been proposed by ruling governments. Some of these efforts, in Hungary especially, have been halted by the government in the face of local Jewish and non-Jewish and international protests. After significant protests by the Jewish community in Croatia, a sign glorifying the collaborationist Ustaša movement was finally shifted away from the entrance to the Jasenovac concentration camp, but was, however, placed at a different site. These moves are aimed at erasing any examination of the dark cores of national history and replacing them with a new national myth that glorifies the last period of home rule before World War II, a time where, unfortunately, anti-Semitism was respectable and politically prominent. All the above have recently manifested themselves in OSCE countries, and I have to sadly note as well that in my own country, the United States, a White House statement last January 27th, commemorating International Holocaust Remembrance Day, somehow managed to omit any mention of the word Jews altogether. Under these conditions, the role of international bodies like OSCE, ODIHR, and IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, are all the more important. They emphasize and remind the international community of the core value of historical memory and the abyss that anti-Semitism can lead into. They bring together political and expert opinion and produce material that includes, but is not limited to, singular national perspectives. It is commonly recognized today that hate, including anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, all forms of hate, is transnational. The internet has erased borders. Any serious effort to confront and combat anti-Semitism must draw upon all available resources, using the global to strengthen the local. But as we've seen, teaching the Holocaust about the Holocaust is not a panacea, for distortion or perversion of the Holocaust can also occur. Using the Holocaust for political propaganda, whether to glorify a compromised national past or to rationalize a radical assault on another nation's existence, can actually be used to once again justify attacks on Jews and to make them visible targets. And I should point out that in many cases, the model that has been created in terms of teaching or using the Holocaust for extremist purposes has been adapted to use against other minorities in today's changing conditions in Europe and in the world. That is why ODIHR's Words into Action project is so important. The education component of the project has already begun working on grassroots projects in 5 OSCE member countries, creating policy guidelines for governments on education in reference to anti-Semitism, researching specific issues facing teachers in this regard, and coming up with recommendations and aids in another 6 OSCE member nations, and creating curricula and material and partnering with UNESCO. A series of expert and teacher training meetings are scheduled for the upcoming year to continue to drive the effort forward. I'm glad to be part of the advisory panel of experts on that initiative, and I strongly encourage national delegations here to push their national authorities to contact the project staff directly, for only in that manner can words truly be put into action. IHRA's 2 working definitions of Holocaust denial and distortion and of anti-Semitism can also play a helpful role by providing clarity and a common basis of understanding for the international community in dealing with these issues. I'm glad to see that the definitions have been adopted by 5 or 6 member countries, already OSCE member countries, as well as the European Parliament's resolution of last May to encourage adoption and to put the definition of anti-Semitism to work. And I certainly hope that the OSCE, of which I believe over 56 of the 57 member nations were in favor of adoption, will continue to push in that direction. And I also want to mention here, as an example of the various vigorous positive leadership, the role of the Romanian chair in IHRA in pushing this forward, as well as the efforts of Rabbi Andrew Baker, the personal representative of the chair in office on combating anti-Semitism, who have been working diligently and strongly on this issue for a number of years. Together with the OSCE and ODIHR's efforts, they demonstrate the commitment and resolve to not allow the memory of the Holocaust to dim and to prevent anti-Semitism from malignantly flourishing today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weissman. Okay, so now that we've had the presentation by the introducers, I'm going to open the floor to contributions. But before I do, just let me take the opportunity to say, apparently the speakers list is still open, so please do take the opportunity to put your names if you haven't signed up for it. And also a point of notice is that all participants are kindly reminded to familiarize themselves with the rules for filming in the plenary hall as indicated in the general information and organizational modalities document available on the HDIM webpage. Live streaming of 2017 HDIM is available. Filming with cameras and video cameras is only permitted by accredited journalists. No other audio-visual recordings should be undertaken without the explicit permission of individuals being filmed. This is the point to bear in mind if you're recording contributions. Also now, we are going to open the floor to the speakers, and just to remind those of you who are planning to make a contribution, for you to speak in the capacity as you've registered on the speakers list. And when you do so, could you please introduce yourself, your name as in your name, organization, a delegation or institution that you represent. The speakers list currently stands at 28, which means that we've set 3 minutes aside per contribution. So just please also remember the OSCE commitments and the principles that govern our interaction here, and make sure that your contributions are in congruence with these. So right now we have for the first contribution coming from the Baha'i International Community Brussels, followed by the Association of Religious Organizations of Kazakhstan. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Tala Ram from the Baha'i International Community, which believes that in order to combat various forms of prejudice, we need to cultivate patterns of thought, language, and action that actually reinforce the oneness of the human race. One insight that's emerging in this regard is that educational processes which build capacity in populations to contribute to the welfare of humanity allow experience and knowledge to replace prejudice. One example of this are young people, a group that constitute a reservoir of capacity that still remains largely untapped. The OSCE region must learn more about the role of youth as protagonists of constructive change. It is often said that young people represent a reservoir of capacity to promote economic growth and productivity. But our experience also suggests that youth have tremendous capacity to promote social progress, given their idealism, imagination, eagerness to contribute to the advancement of a society, and capacity to mobilize in large numbers in environments of mutual support. The BIC welcomes the efforts which have already been made and encourages the OSCE to further explore how educational processes and capacity-building endeavors can reinforce the collective awareness of humanity's oneness, particularly among younger generations, so as to move beyond tolerance and non-discrimination through collectively working together for the betterment of society. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And now could we have the Association of Religious Organizations of Kazakhstan, followed by the Russian Federation. Thank you.
Благодарю.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the floor. Speaking of non-discrimination and tolerance, I'd like to make the following comments. I think we can observe how a violation of the principles of non-discrimination and tolerance can result not only in violence against individual communities, but even large-scale military activity. On the contrary, in places where conflicts are fomenting, but sufficient attention is paid to tolerance and non-discrimination, it has been possible to preserve peace and a high level of security, even in very complex circumstances. So I'd like to speak to some of the aspects of the legislations in my country, the Republic of Kazakhstan, where in the law covering religious organizations, unjustifiably high fines and penalties are applied both to physical persons and to organizations as a whole. And there is, in fact, a discrimination with respect to religious organizations. And so what would our recommendations be? We recommend to the government of the Republic of Kazakhstan that it review Article 490 of the Administrative Code in order to make it more humane. First of all, there should be a standard of warning. I mean, that isn't even possible in the case of religious communities, but that's also true of social groups and private entrepreneurs. Rather than immediately imposing a penalty, one should start with a warning, and that is discriminatory in the case of religious organizations. The fines and penalties are immediately, there is no warning. Second, one needs to make a distinction between a violation of the law by the member of an association, an official, or the organization as a whole. One shouldn't immediately impose a fine and insist on the cessation of activity of the religious organization. So this really amounts to collective punishment for a legal violation by an individual. Third, all administrative fines for religious organizations should be reduced because they are disproportionately high. They are at the level, or even higher, than the level of fines imposed on the business leaders of very large corporations. Fourth, the standard of cessation of activity should be removed from the article because that makes it possible for executive and judicial bodies to interpret things in an arbitrary way. Apart from that, a punishment under this article occurs not for a deliberate violation of the law with a view to causing loss or harm, but rather because of organization of some peaceful religious assembly, ceremony, or what have you. And this norm, this standard of cessation of activity, should be very clearly defined in order to prevent abuse. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for that. Okay, we're now turning to the Russian Federation, followed by the delegation of the USA. Please.
Спасибо большое, господин модератор.
Thank you very much. Participants, today one of the most difficult tasks is an effective way of discerning the difference between intolerance and freedom of expression. Measures adopted to support stability in society and discrimination. Furthermore, the distortions in this area have become a sad reality. The promotion of tolerance in the OSCE is often done to the detriment of alternative points of view. As a result, we see the arising of aggressive attitudes to the majority. So the fight for tolerance actually ends in more intolerance. Western elites, above all the US and the European Union, have introduced the idea of positive discrimination towards some groups of society. This is dangerous. It will lead to increasing tensions in society. And this is taking place in the context of infamous double standards. Criticisms of religion, and particularly global one such as traditional Christianity, is fine, but it's not possible to criticize. But you cannot criticize the liberal approach. You're accused of homophobia or intolerance. And this is very practical. Values that have existed for hundreds of years, that have formed the basis of civilization, are considered worn-out stereotypes, whereas the modern precepts are seen to be the only genuine democratic precepts. This one-dimensional approach is harmful. We see ridiculous examples where we promote the tolerance for different religions, but at the same time ban the wearing of hijabs or crosses. There is a worrying idea of some participants to merge into three representatives. One, which would then have its mandate extended to other forms of intolerance. That would be a way of hiding or ignoring certain serious problems such as discrimination against Christians or Muslims. We hope this path won't be followed by the future chair of the OSCE. The principle of political correctness taken to its extreme will leads to some countries welcoming refugees but then hushing up some of the crimes that are committed. For example, we see cases where there is only sluggish investigation of sexual harassment or rape. And then we're supposed to be surprised when there are outbreaks of aggression in Europe. It is time to understand that the intrusive policy of double standards will not lead to any genuine benefits. The security of states cannot be achieved without due respect for difference of opinions, culture, and conviction. The full text will be made available. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Now I turn the floor to the United States, followed by the Christian Evangelical Church of Turkmenistan. Thank you.
Thank you, moderator. Today, more than ever, it is important that education at all levels promote excellence and equal access for all students, regardless of background or circumstance. A key priority is to develop opportunities that will help allow students to reach their full potential. A cornerstone of our federal education law supports states and school districts in improving equity and excellence in primary and secondary education. It provides the latitude to do what's best for children while preserving civil rights protections for students. We must also continue to help communities provide educational spaces free from violence and discrimination so that all students have the best chance to learn and thrive. As our Secretary of Education just commemorated earlier this year, marked the 45th anniversary of Title IX, the landmark legislation passed by Congress that seeks to ensure, and I quote, "No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance," close quote. The amendment to Higher Education Act was originally proposed by Democrat Senator Birch Bayh, signed into law by Republican President Richard Nixon, and was later renamed for Congresswoman Patsy Mink, a third-generation Japanese American who was all too familiar with discrimination. Mink's law has served the important role in shaping our nation's educational environment. Title IX has helped to make clear that educational institutions have a responsibility to protect every student's right to learn in an environment respectful of their rights and to prevent unjust deprivation of those rights. It is a responsibility that the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights takes seriously. There are also remaining challenges. Far too many girls in the OSCE region are denied an education due to poverty, violence, instability, and conflict, and harmful social and cultural norms, such as early and forced marriage, that force girls to drop out of school much too soon. That is not acceptable. We must all do more to improve education for girls. As our president has said, quote, "Education has the power to uplift, it has the power to transform, and perhaps more important, education has the power to create greater equality and justice in our lives," and I close, quote. We must continue the important work to provide educational access and opportunity to help all students learn, succeed, and fulfill their potential. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you for that, sir. Okay, so now, next on the list is the Christian Evangelical Church Turkmenistan, followed by Serbia.
Приветствую.
I would like to welcome all participants in this conference. Thank you, moderator. I'm from the Christian Evangelical Church in Kazakhstan. My name is Igor Andreikin. Now, the law of the Republic of Kazakhstan that governs religious activity sets out a special status for two denominations which cover most of the believers of our country. And this kind of preference opens up all sorts of opportunities for the titular denominations. They have certain privileges and they have access to state support. But in that connection, and because of that, other religious groups that have fewer adherents find themselves in a disadvantaged situation, and that is discriminatory. For instance, the obligatory legislation and the disproportionately strict requirements for legalization of religious activity is something that small groups objectively cannot fulfill. There are excessive requirements or conditions to be fulfilled to receive permission for the building or the reconstruction of premises for religious activity, and again, small groups cannot do that. There are excessively strict conditions to be met to lease a premise, and that sometimes simply makes it impossible for the right of religion to be realized. And the absence of the opportunity for people who do not want to register to nevertheless enjoy their rights for freedom of thought, confession, and religion without being punished. Official division into traditional and non-traditional religious groups in school textbooks and in the official rhetoric, and a varied reaction of the forces of law and order to conducting investigations and operationally intervening when there is an application from the representative of a religious minority. And our recommendation is that the law of the Republic of Kazakhstan be brought in line with international standards, that there should be assurance of equal rights and possibilities for the representatives of all religious groups, and that there should be a policy of tolerance and non-discrimination for all religions and religious groups whose adherents live on the territory of the Republic. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for that. The floor is now given to Serbia, followed by the Giuseppe Dossetti Observatory for Religious Tolerance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Brankica Jankovic, Republic of Serbia Commissioner for Protection of Equality, an independent and autonomous state body. The Commissioner's authority makes this institution a central national mechanism specialized for suppressing all forms of discrimination and for promoting equality. The topic of today's session is a good opportunity for me to present good practice and activities we have undertaken in order to enable even very young children in Serbia to understand the concept of discrimination, how to fight it, how to reject inequality, and why tolerance is important. Discrimination is when a person would not allow another person to work with him or her only because this other person is somehow different, said a first pupil in a response to a question in a survey for our publication entitled "Do Not Tolerate Discrimination, Ask for Protection and Respond." This publication tackles complex issues about equality and discrimination in a simple way while offering many real-life examples from the practice of the Commissioner. In addition, we have established the young panelists, discrimination busters, comprising of children 13 to 11 years of age, with an idea of having them act as young advisors to the Commissioner. Within their activities, a new generation of young people have come of age who share their knowledge, ideas, and stories of tolerance with other children, both in schools and in local communities. We have established a competition for awarding a prize for the best literary work, fine arts work, and photo entitled Bridge of Understanding Cross-Generation Solidarity for elementary school students. For law school students in the Republic of Serbia who will take over important roles in fighting discrimination, the Commissioner for Protection of Equality has established the Moot Court program competition in the area of protection against discrimination. The objective of this competition is to contribute to the strengthening of the education in this area. We also published a coloring book entitled "We Are All Equal and We Can Live Together," intended for children in preschools. And it is with pride that I can say that we have tried and hopefully succeeded by implementing activities aimed to promoting equality and strengthening tolerance in including all age group in young people from preschool to university level. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for that. And next on the list is the Giuseppe Dossetti Observatory for Religious Tolerance and Freedom, followed by the Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Association. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Education is one of the key ways to promote religious tolerance and non-discrimination, since it addresses the roots of the phenomenon. Mingling with students belonging to different religions is in itself a great help to understand the unity of the humankind. Moreover, it is important that school teaches about different religions and permits to each student to manifest and tell her or his belief. Knowledge about the other's religion can reduce harmful misunderstanding and stereotypes. Educational programs should be developed and strengthened in order to promote a better understanding and respect for different cultures, ethnicities, and religions. The education to respect of human rights and fundamental freedom is not less important, but for students at all levels, as well as for those attending military, police, and public service schools. When dealing with education of young generation, it should also bear in mind that in accordance with the indivisibility, interdependence, and interrelation of human dimension commitments, participating states should always respect the right of parents to ensure the religious and moral education of their children in conformity with their own conviction when developing and performing these educational programs. Our observatory applauds the teaching materials to counter anti-Semitism and intolerance against Muslims, and in accordance with the common approach in addressing all forms of religion intolerance and discrimination, urge the ODIHR to draft guidelines for educators on countering intolerance and discrimination against Christians. Interreligious dialogue and dialogue between religious communities and participating states are other important means in order to promote greater tolerance, respect, and understanding between believers of different communities and believers and non-believers, as well as to ensure the stability and security of our democratic societies. Let me remark that interreligious dialogue is properly speaking an internal matter of religious communities, which should be free to decide if and when start this dialogue, as well as to decide with which communities and on which it should conduct it, while the dialogue between religious communities and governmental bodies has different premises and goals, since it is aimed to achieve a better understanding of the requirements of position of religious communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Now I have the Western Thrace Minority University Graduates Association, followed by a delegation from Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Distinguished delegates, my name is Onur Mustafa Ahmet, and representing Western Thrace Turkish minority, we call upon the Greek state to ensure the rights and guarantee the equal opportunity to the Turkish minority in terms of education with the majority, to end up discrimination in the region of Western Thrace in terms of socioeconomic development among the minority and majority resident communities. Since 2010, Greece has faced more than just an economic crisis because it lasted more than expected. Since then, Greece has the largest unemployment rate among the EU countries, reaching the 25%. Western Thrace for many years was the poorest region of Greece, having about 35% lower economic welfare than the country average. Also, the unemployment rate in Western Thrace is more than Greece's average, reaching up to the 30%. Because of this serious socioeconomic change, most of the even university graduates, young people, are jobless and are obliged to work with their family at farms or obliged to migrate in order to find a job anywhere else. Again, the population of many minority villages have decreased, especially in the last 5 years. An important proportion of the minority lives in the mountainous regions where there are many small villages whose accessibility is almost impossible, especially in winter times, since the Greek authorities' lack of interest to develop the infrastructure of the region. This lack of interest obliged people to migrate to bigger villages, towns, or abroad. The Greek authorities in recent years closed 60 minority primary schools, using the economic crisis and lower number of students at those schools as an excuse. However, while closing the schools, the authorities did not consider the regional difficulties in accessibility and the autonomous structure of the Turkish minority education. This implementation justifies the intolerance of the Greek authorities towards the Turkish minority. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for that. And I'll now give the floor to the delegation from Ukraine, followed by the delegation from Azerbaijan.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Dear participants, the Ukrainian delegation has repeatedly drawn attention within the OSCE to the threats posed by the surge of radicalism, aggressive nationalism, and neo-Nazism in the Russian Federation. The growing aggressive nationalistic statements within Russia, paired with xenophobic public statements by mainstream politicians, presents a challenge to Russia in terms of implementation of its OSCE commitments and serious risk to long-term stability within the OSCE area. Many people belonging to a Muslim community in Russia seriously suffer from suspicion of religious extremism and connection with radicals and even terrorist groups. This affects residents and natives of the North Caucasus and many millions of migrant workers from Central Asian countries. Regular repressions against religious organizations and groups paired with ethnic profiling by the police results in multiple discrimination. The situation is even harder for non-citizens, who are seen as foreigners on the basis of religion, country of origin, and citizenship. Propaganda has persisted in creating an image of enemy of the Ukrainian people, and state television stations are constantly frightening viewers. The revival of anti-Semitism has also been manifested in regular attacks on synagogues and sites of religious significance to Judaism, the destruction of memorial and Jewish cemeteries. There is an increase in ethnic discrimination by the Russian government. A striking example is the practice of segregating Roma children in schools. All these facts are documented in the NGO's alternative report on the implementation of the UN Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination by the Russian Federation, prepared for the review this August. We would like to, as we clearly see, Russia faces important problems in terms of non-implementation of its international obligations and the OEC commitments, which include state discrimination against several ethnicities, hate speech, hate crimes, and anti-extremist laws that violate human rights and fundamental freedoms. And we would like to take this opportunity to urge Russia to fully cooperate with the OEC institutions and use their expertise to assist Russia in implementing the relevant OEC commitments and addressing the root causes of the rise of violent radicalism, neo-Nazism, and xenophobia in the Russian Federation. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you for that. Next on the list is Azerbaijan, followed by the Federation of Western Thrace Turks in Europe.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Azerbaijan is one of a few states in the world in which multiculturalism is a state policy. The state has been playing a leading role in conducting this policy, in observing its principles, in pursuing the policy of tolerance and non-discrimination. One of the most important features of multiculturalism policy of Azerbaijan is that it promotes development of high level of relations between state and religion in Azerbaijan. The high level of relations between state and religion is seen in the following four advantages. The first, religious freedom is guaranteed by the state. Granting religious freedom to its citizens is one of the priorities of the domestic policy of Azerbaijan. The Azerbaijani state considers religious freedom of its citizens as an integral part of their rights and freedoms. The Constitution of the Republic of Azerbaijan and the law of the Republic of Azerbaijan on freedom of religious belief and other legal documents contain articles related to religious freedom. The second advantage is that all religions in Azerbaijan are equal before the law. There are about 750 religious organizations. Of them, 721 Muslim, 17 Christian, 8 Jewish, 2 Baha'i, and 1 Christian. Of them, 700 of non-Muslim religious organizations are getting financial aid from the state. And the third advantage is that the state provides all necessary assistance to religious organizations. Since 2003, about 250 mosques were built or renovated by the state. By the initiative and the support of the president, 2 synagogues were built respectively in 2003 for Ashkenazi Jews and in 2012 for mountainous Jews. In 2008, Roman Catholic Church has been built in Baku. And the fourth advantage is that interreligious relations in Azerbaijan are based on principles of mutual respect and cooperation. It is a logical consequence of the first three advantages. Thus, the policy of multiculturalism of the Republic of Azerbaijan promotes the development of high level of relations between the state and religion, which in its turn creates favorable conditions for the country's socio-economic development. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Next, we have the Soteria International, followed by the Evangelical Friedskei Mittelpunkt Braunschweig. Please forgive my pronunciation.
Sorry, I think it's the ABTTF turn.
I think you're right.
Sorry, yes, you're right.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Melek Kırmacı Arık, Federation of Western Thrace Turks in Europe, representing the Turkish community of Western Thrace in Greece. Education plays an essential role in countering racism and other forms of intolerance, including Muslims, and principle of equality and non-discrimination is a key to securing equal access to quality education for persons belonging to minority groups. The Turkish community in Western Thrace is granted with the right to education in its mother tongue and autonomy in the management of its educational institutions with the Treaty of Lausanne. However, as my colleague from the region said, more than 60 minority primary schools in the region have been closed down on economic grounds with the decision of the Minister of Education since 2010. Furthermore, there are no bilingual kindergartens or nurseries for the Turkish children to learn their mother tongue in their early childhood. As noted in the U.S. International Religious Freedom Report for 2016, the leaders of the Turkish community in the region continue to criticize the absence of bilingual kindergartens in Thrace. Despite many applications by the community organizations, the Greek government rejected proposals to open Turkish-Greek bilingual kindergartens in the existing bilingual primary schools and rather adopted a legal framework in August for the implementation of a pilot project which envisages that a bilingual minority member would work with a teacher in a kindergarten class in public schools in 6 provinces where children belonging to the Turkish community in Western Thrace live. This is not a solution for the problem in the region where minority children have no option than to go to the public kindergartens since there is no permit for the minority kindergartens in the region. Also, the U.S. report further noted that the Greek government provided funding to the Muslim minority in Thrace to select and pay salaries of teachers of Islam in state schools and the salaries of the 3 official muftis appointed by the state by the 240 Imams law. Despite strong objection by the Turkish community to the law, Islamic preachers were trained and appointed to the public schools in the region, and textbooks in Greek language for teaching Islam to the Turkish children in the region in the public schools were prepared. We regret that the Turkish community in the region has no right to take a part in decision-making processes in issues which directly affect its daily life and their future. Thank you, Moderator.
So next on the list is Soteria International.
Thank you very much. Josephine Carlson with Soteria International. It's a major obligation of all OSCE member states to combat discrimination, and substantial resources are invested to diminish the symptoms of discrimination and non-tolerance. Still, discrimination and non-tolerance continue to challenge our societies. Discrimination and non-tolerance are often considered to be the offspring of inner conflicts in society, and it is the inner conflicts of individuals which are reflected in the outer conflicts of society. Soteria International would like to suggest that we consider the inner conflicts of individuals as the basis for discrimination and non-tolerance. Finding coherence in one's own being is the only way to reach a deep sense of meaning in life and harmoniously integrate in society. A society without discrimination and non-tolerance is possible only when individuals become actively aware of their feelings, thoughts, words, and actions. Ultimately, only inner transformation will ensure proper fulfillment in life, allowing peace and harmony to come, thereby opposing discrimination and non-tolerance at all levels. Addressing the outer conflicting situation as the base of discrimination and non-tolerance disregards the seed inside the individual, always awaiting the right conditions to grow into outer conflict. Conflicts can only be addressed at the individual level by engaging the individual as a whole, centered in the heart. The experience demonstrated by humankind so far indicates that often legality prevails over righteousness, but when things are considered just as an exclusive result of legislative decisions, human rights can miss the ethical and moral dimension. The Latin term concordia captures this concept of the opening of hearts, in which each and every individual shares their experiences and the way in which the difficulties they face make them grow. Seen in this new perspective, the individual seeds of conflict, discrimination, and non-tolerance become, first of all, invaluable opportunities to grow. Very often, conflicts, discrimination, and non-tolerance stem from diversity and from the dichotomy created by the idea of being right or wrong in our beliefs. However, it is in fact very important to embrace diversity and to understand it in an inclusive and superior nature. We all have the same origin as human beings, and diversity is nothing else than a great opportunity for enrichment. Instead of blaming others for being different, it is important to understand that others actually help us see ourselves better. Fighting what we see in others is actually fighting against ourselves. When we are able to embrace diversity, we're able to embrace others. And happiness is created, among other ways, through the act of sharing. The violation of freedom of conscience expressed in civil society through government restrictions or through popular hostility against freedom of religion or belief are a significant factor of tensions, conflicts, and wars. Soteria International recommends for the OSCE member states to consider freedom of conscience as the foundation of the whole human rights edifice. Human conscience is what makes society human.
Could you please conclude?
Negligence of this foundation makes the whole concept of human rights fragile. Thank you.
Very much. Next on the list is the Evangelical Freiheitliche Mittelpunkt Braunschweig. My German's terrible. Please forgive me for that. I hope you know who you are.
Уважаемые участники,
Participants, we'd like to express our concern about the discrimination against religion in Kazakhstan, where the constitution forbids discrimination against religion, but in the national law, religious communities are subjected to discrimination. And this will get worse if the suggested changes by the government are implemented. For example, extremism is being countered with discrimination which goes beyond legal approaches. We're seeing cases where representatives of religions are not allowed to carry out their work without specific agreements. This isn't in line with the duty of representatives of churches to preach their beliefs. And not every individual who has a spiritual education ends up in an official position with an official agreement. Quite often they are voluntary, and so they don't have a signed work agreement. So limiting the function of preaching to those who have an official post rules out those who are volunteering. The preachers carry out their work because of their relationship with God. They do not do so because they are subject to some kind of working agreement or arrangement. So this amendment by the government is a direct interference in religious communities is discriminatory and intolerant, we would urge the religious ministry of Afghanistan to review these amendments and not interfere in this way in communities with peaceful worldviews. They should ensure that the laws leave free practice to religious communities. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Next on the list is the Netzwerk Muslimische Gesellschaft, NMZ.
Thank you. I'm Gözde Taşkaya, representing Netzwerk Muslimische Zivilgesellschaft. In this session, I want to set up my focus on the discussions about the so-called Islamic kindergartens in Austria. The Integration Ministry commissioned a professor to conduct a study about Islamic kindergartens. A popular Austrian newspaper called Falter leaked that the result of the study had significant changes in which neutral or positive statements were deleted and replaced with the opposite wording. Due to Falter, these changes were carried out by public officials working in the Integration Ministry. This clearly showed that Islamophobia has reached the very top and is even supported by the Austrian government. Mr. Kurz said at the public event that he wants to shut down all Islamic kindergartens, and his plans to get rid of these kindergartens is to set up some quality criteria. His intentions obviously is that these kindergartens should fail to meet the requirements for state benefits, so that they won't have any choice but to close those kindergartens. Kurz himself said that this is the easiest way in terms of the law, and he believes that this will ensure integration, because he argues that Islamic kindergartens encourages parallel societies. Sebastian Kurz agitates successfully against the Muslim minority in his country, like he did yesterday on national television. He ignores kindergartens, which were attacked in the last years. We will especially not forget the pepper spray attack onto an Islamic kindergarten around Christmas time 2014. And we will not ignore the kids getting attacked on the streets whenever they attend school, a school trip. These examples show that Muslims have become a target of hate. In times of populism, we reached a new level of anti-Muslim sentiments and Islamophobia. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Sorry, next on the list is Milli Görüş from Netherlands.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I am Ömer Karaca from Milli Görüş, Netherlands. When I was in Spain last year, I spoke to two persons who are cousins and living in different continents, but they were original from Pakistan. One is living in Canada and the other in England. I asked them both this question. I asked, do you feel more Canadian or for Pakistan? One of them replied proudly, Canadian, of course. I asked the same question to the other person, who was from England, but he was doubting and couldn't give me a clear answer. If we want to educate teachers who in return will educate children and adolescents, then we should start with selecting the right words so that we can make the right impact. That starts with not using the word tolerance. Although, meant positively, tolerance is a word a lot of minorities have a negative relationship with, because in its essence, tolerance teaches us that one tolerates, the other does not accept. This can be found when we talk about simple things like tolerating someone chewing bubblegum in the classroom, but gets difficult when we talk about religion and culture, because religion and culture is not something which should be tolerated, but accepted as part of the community. For example, Islam and Muslims have been in the Netherlands for over 50 years now. A lot of young people don't know different than that they are Dutch and Muslim. So the Dutch culture should not tolerate Islam, it should embrace the fact that it's part of their collective identity as a nation. So to conclude, we need to rethink the terms we use so that not one dominant group can claim them, but every group sitting on the table feels like an equal when discussing how we want to form our society. Second, instead of tolerance, we should talk about inclusiveness. Instead of teaching kids to tolerate, we should teach them what our politicians can't, building a society which is inclusive to all people from different cultures, religion, and other personal preferences, etc. Only then true harmony is possible, because it's built on the idea of working together instead of minding our own business and letting the other do the same. If we can achieve this in education, then not only do I believe we can maintain a certain quality of education, but we can also educate the rest of the world how to live together as a multicultural, multi-religious part of the world that does work. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Next on the list is Christ-like Gemeinde des Wollens Evangeliums.
Добрый вечер.
Good afternoon. Thank you, moderator, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I would like to touch in some more detail on the new law on religious organizations in the Republic of Kazakhstan. This covers various forms of religious activity. As we've already heard today from previous speakers, that law is discriminatory vis-à-vis various religious organizations. For instance, the proposed amendments will in fact undermine the human rights of individuals who want to spread their religious ideology and who believe that the traditions of the nation and the cultural values are important. And our commentary would be that these terms should be more carefully defined. As it is set out, the terms are very vague, which makes judicial decision-making very difficult. When you talk about the traditions of the nation, the cultural values, in Kazakhstan there are many different ethnic groups, many different nationalities. And up until now, the national diversity of Kazakhstan had been respected, and that gave a very positive atmosphere. But the vague and not inconcrete use of these terms can undermine peace and security of our multinational country. We'd also like to note that in Kazakhstan, despite the OSCE and the UN protesting, there is more and more pressure under the pretext of combating extremism and terrorism on various religious groups, and there is tolerance and non-discrimination with respect to religious organizations. Representatives of peaceful confessions, such as Jehovah's Witnesses and the Seventh-day Adventists, are in prison under trumped-up charges. There is clearly a situation of intolerance and discrimination. There are propaganda groups that spread hate speech about certain religious groups, and that remains unpunished. There's full impunity. The Republic of Kazakhstan's legislation should be, in fact, substantially improved. In one of the evangelical communities of a small town was imposed a fine of several thousand euros, and that meant that the religious premises had to be closed down, and many thousand believers were not able to practice their religion. So there should be a review by the Kazakh government of the law governing religions. This should be brought in line with international standards concerning human rights and freedom of religion, and we will also call on the government to bring an end to intolerance and discrimination on religious grounds. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Next on the list is the Turkmenistan Helsinki Foundation for Human Rights, followed by the International Platform for Global Rights of Peaceful People.
Thank you very much indeed, moderator. As president of the Turkmenistan Helsinki Foundation, I'm taking the floor on behalf of those who believe in freedom of worship and the peoples and ethnic minorities of Turkmenistan. we all have equal rights as humans, not to be subjected to threats, persecution, or measures undermining human dignity. But if you look at the video on the dissident site, NT, where you see a young person of non-traditional orientation being abused by local police, then it's extremely shocking. Nobody would recognize this. Nobody recognizes this individual. This is a person with their own views, their own way of life. In Turkmenistan, there are such minorities. They meet, they try to support one another. For example, the 100 Fountains is one locality where they meet. That's one thing. Secondly, with regard to freedom of belief, in our society at the moment, you can see an alarming growth of intolerance towards those who are just beginning to study religion. I'm not even talking about those who already have chosen their particular confession. Under the pretext of fighting terrorism, young people are persecuted, those who want to go abroad to study, those who want to worship, those who work in mosques. They are asked to sign an agreement that they will not commit specific acts, asked to cooperate with the security forces, and we see this affecting individuals, affecting their relatives, and the situation is that the security services are trying to keep tabs on how people are worshipping. That has a detrimental impact on hundreds of people. There are often regular cases where young people have revealed that they have worked with the security services. People are then arrested, often on completely fabricated accusations, imprisoned for years. So for decades in the country, we've seen these practices. Unfortunately, not a single Turkmenistan official has been brought to account for these violations. So I have to keep my statement short, but you can find the full statement on the ODO website. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Next on the list is the International Platform for Global Rights of Peaceful People, followed by Iroko Onlus. What's yours?
Good afternoon, Lori Alamafe, and dear experts. I'm the president of the International Platform Global Rights of Peaceful Peoples. My name is Sergei Marchin. At a conference in Vienna in June of this year, there were some empty words said by the representative of Ukraine about the religious situation in Crimea, destruction of mosques, what have you. But according to our monitoring of media, not a single church, mosque, synagogue, what have you, has been closed down. On the contrary, new ones are being built. In Crimea, there isn't a Russian Orthodox Church. There's only a Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and it's subject to the Kiev Patriarchate. And those churches continue to function. Now, Ukrainian was the only official language in Crimea when it was part of Ukraine, and now there are 3: Russian, Tatar, and Ukraine. And so we believe that a monitoring mission of the OSCE should be sent to Crimea. That's the appeal. Now, our international platform, the Global Rights of Peaceful Peoples, is certainly prepared to organize contacts with representatives of national minorities and religious groups if the OSCE should take the decision to send such a monitoring mission. And I would like to appeal now to the leadership of the OSCE. It is important to do away with discrimination of us, the participants in this conference, all non-governmental organizations. We need to change the rules. I mean, a group of 10 or 20 representatives from different countries should be able to get together and submit recommendations that would be looked at seriously in the OSCE and not just remain empty words to be put away in a drawer, as is currently the case. The representatives of participating states have a position to put forward our recommendations that are taken seriously. That is done also by ombudsmen, but not by NGOs. They are not treated seriously. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for that. Next on the list is Iroko Onlus, followed by the Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. My name is Esoya Agatise, and I'm here today on behalf of people of African descent. I'm happy I'm able to speak now because yesterday I couldn't, I was too late on the list. Now, I'm here to ask that the OSCE ODA formally include people of African descent in the group that is considered as being subjected to racist and xenophobic attacks. We are the visibly invisible group that everyone knows is stereotyped, discriminated against, and subjected to some of the most vicious verbal and physical attacks. In addressing issues of racism and xenophobic issues, however, in talking about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, these are the ones, xenophobia. When we talk about xenophobia, however, anti-Semitism and Islamophobia are rightly mentioned, and so we talk about Jews and Muslims, the religious minorities, which are specifically identified. But people of African descent are not mentioned or even considered at all, except in the most casual and approximate manner. The most evident example of this is the widespread acknowledgement of and attention to the Holocaust, but no equal acknowledgement of the transportation of millions of Africans into slavery in the Americas and Europe. So my being here today is to say that it is time to change this. It is time to bring the daily discrimination, stereotyping, and xenophobic attacks against people of African descent into mainstream discussions of racism, discrimination, intolerance, and xenophobia. That would ensure that adequate attention is given to the specific structural discrimination and racism that we face. So my suggestion is to do this and also to provide necessary and adequate resources to address the specific issues facing people of African descent in OSCE countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Ahead of the next intervention, could I please just remind participants the purpose of this session and to remind that the session is designed to discuss how education can support an appreciation for cultural and religious diversity. So whilst you may have your own agendas, you have to be also aware that the session, or contributions to the session have to be within the parameters as set out. Thank you. So next on the list is the Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Ahmad Shadov. I represent Azerbaijan Institute for Democracy and Human Rights. Before my speech, I want to express my support to United Kingdom and British people because, as you know, a homemade bomb exploded on a train in London, injuring 22 people this morning. I wish the injured a speedy recovery and condemn this terror attack. So all human beings are born equal in rights and dignity. Everyone should be protected, not threatened. But across the OSCE region, we continue to see an alarming rise in intolerance. Racism, xenophobia, and other forms of intolerance continue to threaten security in the increasing diverse societies of the OSCE region. Despite efforts by some states to address intolerance and discrimination, unfortunately, many participating states do not adequately implement their tolerance and non-discrimination commitments. As a human rights defender from Azerbaijan, I can proudly say that Azerbaijan is at the center of multiculturalism, not only in Europe, but also in all the world. The peoples of the South Caucasus live in peace and brotherhood for many years, and the principles of multiculturalism, together living, and tolerance are always protected in this region. Speaking about the tolerance environment in Azerbaijan and Georgia, I must say that many peoples belonging to national minorities of both countries live in peace and fraternity, and this can be an example for the whole world. Today, people in different religions, nations, and races live in peace in Azerbaijan. Until now, there has been no discrimination or murder in our country on religious and national grounds. Today, there are mosques, synagogues, churches, and other centers of worship in a radius of 1 kilometer in our country. Representatives of Russian, Jewish, and other communities are represented in the Azerbaijani parliament today. It's possible to see this experience in neighboring Georgia as well. By the way, I would like to thank the Georgian representative here, because about 400,000 Azerbaijanis live in Georgia today in peace and stability. Those people have their own schools, newspapers and magazines, radio channels. Today there are 4 Azerbaijan MPs in the Georgian parliament. Georgians living in Azerbaijan also have equal rights with us. For example, I am from the Garh district in northwestern region of Azerbaijan, and thousands of Georgians live there. I have many Georgian friends. These multicultural traditions reinforce the relationship between the two peoples. This is also an example of multiculturalism throughout the world. Each year in May and November, the Azerbaijanis and Georgians celebrate St. George feast together. This is not just a religious holiday, it's also a holiday of friendship and brotherhood of the two nations. At the end, unfortunately, we do not have the same kind of relation with our other neighbor country, Armenia. As I mentioned at the beginning of my speech, many participating states do not adequately implement their tolerance and non-discrimination commitments, and Armenia is one of those countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So next on the list is the Church of Scientology, the Human Rights Office, followed by the Barnabas Fund.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Ivan Arjona, Director of the European Office for Public Affairs and Human Rights of the Church of Scientology. Education in human rights and respect is important to stop discrimination and intolerance. And it's also important to increase the well-being of citizens within the OSCE region and worldwide. Education not only for our children, but education for the officials in our governments. When one persecutes religious movements, traditional or non-traditional, or if you allow it, you definitely create a problem in the school systems in which children of parents belonging to the persecuted religions will be discriminated and are liable to hate crimes within their own school and by their own schoolmates. I insist that we also have to educate not only children, but specifically government officials on no discrimination and respect of the differences, and to respect the decisions of the European Court of Human Rights, as well as international human rights treaties. Scientology is a growingly recognized religion around the world and also in Europe. I speak in representation of millions of Scientologists, and this time in the name of their children in over 169 countries, but specifically for those from the 57 member states of the OSCE region. Specifically within the Russian Federation, we Scientologists, as well as Jehovah's Witnesses, other Christian movements, and the so-called non-traditional religions, are living in an era in which specific officials within the Russian Federation powers are misusing the Constitution and security to do a witch hunt on minorities that become defenseless before officials who will not even respect the legal decisions of the European Court of Human Rights. The OSCE has within its mandate, and in fact every represented member state, the mission to facilitate dialogue between parties in crisis. There is a religious freedom crisis in the Russian Federation, and we respectfully request the OSCE chairmanship and the idea to facilitate dialogue between the Russian Federation and the Church of Scientology and other non-traditional movements so that officials and the Church can work together to a proper education of the discriminating officials about religious freedom and acceptance and respect for the non-traditional religions that respect the laws of the country and international treaties, especially those whose rights have already been recognized by the European Court of Human Rights. I ask you to please not stay silent. Do not allow discrimination to happen just because someone could be afraid of the power of oppressors of religious freedom. Yesterday were the Jehovah's Witnesses being banned. Today we are being persecuted. If you do not stand up, you will have your responsibility in not having moved to avoid religious persecution and discrimination. And who knows, if tomorrow would be you the one persecuted for your ideas and in need of others to stand for you, but they will be silenced, banned and suppressed, there will be nobody to stand for you. Please, for God's sake, help without fear to facilitate dialogue. Do not let innocent people to stay in jail as it is happening. Please, I'm finishing one sentence. Please don't discriminate. Help us protect our children for the discrimination they are suffering due to the intolerant persecution of the beliefs of their parents. Please stand up. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Next on the list is the Barnabas Fund, followed by the Human Rights Education Centre.
Thank you. Mark Green, Barnabas Fund. Barnabas Fund requests that OSCE states take seriously all issues of intolerance and violence towards others, including hate crimes towards those who claim their rights to change religion under Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. OSCE states should therefore 1. Promote better education among police, social services and other authorities on issues of violence towards those who changed their religious faith. 2. Include crimes motivated by hostility to apostates among their classification of hate crimes. 3. Work to promote wider education and understanding of the absolute right to follow the religion of your choice, or none, among the general population and particularly among communities where this is poorly respected. 4. Robustly reject calls to introduce blasphemy laws, but rather educate and protect individual freedom of religion and speech. 5. Promote the concept of equality before the law for all, and reject moves to make any religious law anything more official than a voluntary code of conduct. Although no country within the OSCE has an apostasy law, the problems remain nevertheless significant for those citizens or migrants who are killed, attacked or otherwise treated violently by members of the faith group that they have left. Data collection is poor in this field, but it is clear that attacks on apostates are a significant and growing issue in many states. Yet OSCE countries are turning a blind eye to the issue despite the clear breaches of law that take place. One high-profile example would be Nissa Hussain and his family in Bradford, UK, who originated in Pakistani Kashmir and were Muslims until conversion. They suffered years of abuse and violent attacks from sections of the local community, but with little sympathy or action from the police, politicians or the local authorities. After many years of threats, criminal damage, arson, physical attacks, and a particularly violent street assault caught on CCTV cameras, he and his family had been victims of at least a dozen hate crimes, but not recorded as such. No real measures were taken by the authorities. Indeed, after one criminal attack, a police sergeant reportedly asked Nissa why he didn't just move away. Where is the rule of law here? Only when intelligence discovered an imminent major threat and armed police officers intervened did Nissa and his family finally flee to another part of the country. Further details and further information is available on the web version of this statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Next on the list is the Human Rights Education Centre, followed by the Independent Human Rights Organization of Uzbekistan.
Thank you. Уважаемые участники.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear moderator, we just heard news from Belarus. A well-known poet and dissident, Vladimir Nikolaev, has been arrested. I mean, there's 9.5 million people living in Belarus. A majority of them are Belarus, but the dictator really discriminates against anything that's Belarusian. There are no universities that teach in the language. In the large cities, there are no schools. And today, even though last year the dictator Lukashenko promised that there would be a Belarus university as of this year, but it's still not the case. The discrimination of the Belarus people was continued after Poland by the Tsarist Russia and then by the Communist Party. But the Belarusians have survived. And despite forced Russification by Lukashenko, we remember our history. We are celebrating the 500th anniversary of the publication of the first book in Belarusian and the 1000th anniversary of the first Belarusian city. Democracy-loving Belarusians should be given the possibility to save their language and their culture. Now, tolerance and discrimination. But what do we see in Belarus? We see discrimination of Belarusians. Now, it's quite paradoxical, but for speaking in Belarusian on the street, you could be detained by the police and a fine would be imposed. Now, that awful situation no longer pertains, but there is not a constitutional guarantee of the Belarusian language to be used by state bodies. That's still not the case. But yesterday, the Russian army entered Belarus, and will they leave Belarus? Well, that's an open question. They are now stationed on the territory. Insofar as human rights are concerned, we are, of course, very grateful to the OSCE because on the basis of our proposal back in 2003, the OSCE started to support the publication of special books, brochures, and other forms of written information to promote human rights education. We considered, and we still consider, that it is only through human rights education that we can contribute to a reduction of intolerance and that we can hope that discrimination in all respects that we're discussing today will finally disappear. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for that. Next on the list is the Independent Human Rights Center Organization of Uzbekistan.
Ismail Adilov.
Ismail Adilov. I'm a representative Independent Human Rights Organization of Uzbekistan. I took the floor before lunch. I'd like to continue and ask the OSCE to pass on a statement. The problem of wearing beards in our country, anybody with a beard is stopped by the police. Now, this could be seen as a religious symbol. We have a national dress. We have asked why this is going on, whether it is a religious symbol or a national dress, but people who are wearing beards get into trouble. People who are wearing gowns as well find themselves in difficulties. I think that in all areas, in the courts, in the government, there have been reforms, but in the courts, we haven't seen any reforms, and that's leading to difficulties. I think it's necessary to reform the law enforcement structure because they apply these punishments at first hand, and I think that it's necessary to find another way to deal with these issues. And people who've been in their positions for a long time have a specific views on what a woman wearing a gown is like, what men with beards are like, and these are not accurate. Our organization is out to defend human rights and working with NGOs. Human Rights Watch, for example, aren't working the way they used to. We had a very open meeting with the American Embassy in the 90s. They were very open to our concerns. Today, it's quite difficult. People might come to see how we are working, share our experience, but it's not going very well. So I think it's difficult to get our recommendations across. We have had representatives coming to our country, but we haven't been able to organize any meetings, and I feel that we're being avoided when we come here. So hopefully in Tashkent we will have the possibility. So my simple request is to the representatives of the OSCE is that they pass on our concerns and heed them. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Next on the list is Sandy Jan, followed by Armenia.
Добрый день.
Good afternoon, Alek Kadukhov. I'm a representative of Civil Society of South Ossetia. It's difficult to overstate the role of education enshrined in the Copenhagen and Moscow documents in the protection of tolerance and the rights of minorities. I particularly think it's interesting in the context of historical science. History, as is known, is used as a political instrument. Sometimes history is falsified, myths are created, and these can lead to conflicts in society with minorities and even to the destruction of entire countries. Because of historical illiteracy, quite often those who are of titular nationals don't know about the minorities in their own country. Now, I don't want to criticize Georgia again, but one has to speak about one's own experience. And the problem, all of the difficulties with minorities in Georgia began when they changed their history books, when they stopped informing and educating about the indigenous minorities there. They are still mentioned, but the mentions are tendentious and critical. For example, the Ossetians are mentioned, but they say the following: the creation of the Ossetian autonomy was illegal. They say the ethnic groups living in Georgia have their historical home elsewhere. Now, that's a quote from one of our history books. Now, that's not the way to pursue historical science. I think all of us, Homo sapiens in the room, know that we came from North Africa, but I don't think Ethiopia or Sudan would be happy if we all of a sudden decided to go back to where we came from. Obviously, that's not possible. So what's happened is what has happened. From 2002, where there were 38,000 Ossetians, in 2014 there are only 14,000. In accordance with the census which has taken place. And looking at the trend, we could see the entire disappearance of Ossetians from Georgia before too long. So what we'd like to do today is make a proposal. We would request that within the ODIHR there be a discussion of how countries in the OSCE approach historical science. Making perhaps history of ethnic minorities a separate subject, and the history of their colonies, if they have them, so that there be an understanding of traditional and other minorities. This is a process which should involve historical experts from those minorities themselves. And if we do that, we will perhaps avoid the tendentious, inflammatory examples which I have mentioned here, which are very far from anyone's understanding of what education is. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Next on the list is Armenia, followed by Crimea SOS. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I would like also to thank our distinguished introducers for framing our discussions today. On a number of occasions, participating states committed themselves to fighting tolerance and non-discrimination through education. They recognized the important role of the ODIHR, its expertise and ability of sharing good practices. In this regard, we particularly emphasize the relevance of Ljubljana decision on tolerance and non-discrimination, promoting mutual respect and understanding. Next year, we will be marking 70-year anniversary of Universal Declaration of Human Rights and UN Convention on Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. We believe that the OSCE as a security organization has a special place in raising awareness on these key international instruments, particularly from the perspective of education and remembrance of genocides. That being said, let me submit a recommendation to ODIHR. Assist participating states in implementing the Ljubljana decision, wherein they commit to promote education on and remembrance of the Holocaust and other genocides recognized as such in accordance with the 1948 Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. I thank you.
Thank you for that. Next on the list is Crimea SOS, followed by the European Centre for Democracy Development.
Good afternoon, colleagues. In 2014, after actual control of the peninsula was taken by Russian authorities, in the Russian mass media and from politicians, there is a message sent to the effect that there are many extremists and terrorists among Crimean Tatars. And this is based on videos of alleged detentions and arrests of Crimean Tatars. In the videos, you see all sorts of munitions and weapons, all of this with a view to labeling Crimean Tatars as criminals. And there is a speculation about the historic myths of Crimean Tatars as collaborators and traitors to the Soviet Union during the Second World War. And this discreditation practice is addressed solely to Crimean Tatars. And today the Russian Federation delegation has once again talked about discriminatory practices that one supposedly observes in Western European countries. And then we hear from Gongos about how wonderful it is that mosques are built, that there are 3 official languages. This is manipulation of information by the Russian Federation, which it has been engaged in constantly for the 3.5 years of the occupation. So I would like to draw your attention to the violations actually occurring as we speak. On the 13th of September, the FSB arrested a Crimean Tatar, Renat Palaramov, who had a number of children, and he was simply taken from his home, and for a number of days he simply disappeared. He was finally identified and found, and it was clear that he had been tortured, that he had been beaten, and he really he had refused to cooperate, and so he had been beaten. And today, the relatives and friends of the individual have appeared before the FSB office to submit an official complaint. The police came in a number of vehicles, and they took these individuals away. No explanations were given to the activists. And instead of the activists, in addition to them being detained, a number of lawyers were detained, and Tarasa Bardimov as well. And after the annexation of the peninsula, these sorts of things are happening virtually every day. There is a systematic policy of instilling fear in the civilian population. And so we appeal to the OSCE to exercise a genuine control over what is happening in Crimea in order to bring to an end torture, unjustified arrest and detention without charge. There must be some independent monitoring of violations of human rights of Crimea, and obviously the non-acceptance of the annexation of Crimea must continue. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your contribution too. We're now down to the last two participants or names on the speakers list. I would just like to remind any delegations who would like to exercise their right of reply to register to do so at this moment. We now have the European Centre for Democracy Development, followed by the delegation. The last speaker will be Moldova at this current time. Thank you.
Moderator, first of all, I'd like to respond to the representative of Ukraine. My name is Valerian Gengler. I'm from the European Centre of Human Rights from Latvia. I regret that none of the Ukrainians came to my report yesterday on xenophobia and racism in Russia, because what you're saying is not scientific. It is baseless, quite baseless. If you're talking about phobia of migrants, I would agree with you. Homophobia, I would also agree with you. But you're talking about phobia of gypsies here. This simply is baseless. You have children coming into the first year of education where they can't write, so they have to be given special attention. So I haven't heard the reply from Ukraine on the law on the destruction of education of national schools in Ukraine. We've heard talk about Tatars. If I watch Russian television, I would agree. But you have to look at the historical question. You mustn't forget the Holocaust. But allow me to address something else. The educational program on national minorities is very important because it can be a means of controlling the content of the educational program. For example, France, which did play the most important role in the financing of the State Fund of Free Islam, a revolutionary movement which has never been addressed. For example, there was also the political program for tolerance. For example, the ghetto in Latvia. There were many different programs on the basis of state support and enthusiasm. There's annual scientific meetings where you have children's groups of all different kinds of religions and nationalities. These are very important because for the first time, we have put the Holocaust in the context of modern extremism. So the last conference took place a few days ago where we had around 60 people. Another is the Museum of Tolerance in Moscow. That's been well financed and it's on a level with New York or Berlin. I've worked for 10 years as vice president of the minority communities of Russia, and I've participated in this project. It's based on Jewish communities and was invited consultation with all groups. It saw the investment of millions of dollars, and it was created together with UNESCO. So with these different projects, yes, I'm just coming to the end now, two projects which are extremely important. The OSCE should send its observers to look at the quality of this. It could serve as an example of best practice for other countries. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Our final speaker is from Moldova, and then we have 4 rights of reply from Greece, Austria, Croatia, and Hungary. Moldova, please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. The principles of non-discrimination, universality, and equality of human rights are essential and represent the pillar of Moldovan human rights protection system guaranteed by the constitution of the country. We can pride ourselves with a history of peaceful cohabitation of many ethnic minorities in the Republic of Moldova, including the representatives of the Jewish community. The Republic of Moldova joined in 2014 as an observer state the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, IRA, enacting the 27th of January as the National Commemoration Day of the Victims of the Holocaust. So far, we have recorded a considerable number of achievements on Holocaust issues. One of the most important deliverables was the adoption on 22nd July 2016 by the Moldovan Parliament of the Declaration on the acceptance of the final report of the International Commission on the Holocaust Study, chaired by Elie Wiesel. Following this political engagement, the government approved on 22nd May 2017 the action plan for 2017-2019 to implement the declaration. This action plan includes the main pillars of IRA: education, commemoration, and research. It contains as well provisions regarding the adjustment of the national legislation and policies to international norms on fighting racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, extremism, and intolerance. In this context, recently a cooperation agreement was signed between the Jewish community of the Republic of Moldova and the Ministry of Education, which establishes a framework for a closer cooperation for the implementation of joint projects, programs, and other partnership initiatives to develop educational policies on Holocaust through curricular and non-curricular educational activities. We were very glad to welcome in Chisinau last February the personal representative of the OSCE chairperson in office on combating anti-Semitism, Rabbi Andrew Baker, who had a number of important meetings, including with the President, Prime Minister, and the Speaker of the Parliament, which was a good opportunity to address anti-Semitism and Holocaust-related issues. We took into consideration all suggestions and recommendations formulated in the report of Rabbi Baker. In March this year, a roundtable on Holocaust remembrance was organized in the Moldovan Parliament with the participation of the Speaker and other members of the Parliament. In conclusion, we reiterate our commitment to further consolidate legislative and institutional instruments capable of preventing and sanctioning anti-Semitism, as well as any type of racism, xenophobia, racial discrimination, and intolerance. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Right now, we have 5 rights of reply. Each right of reply will be limited to 2 minutes, and the first on the list is Greece. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. In exercising my right of reply, I would like to stress that Greece is firmly committed to continue its policy to uphold the right to education of the members of the Muslim minority in Thrace. We are ready, on the one hand, to improve the functioning of the existing minority schools in Thrace, 130 primary minority schools, 2 secondary and 2 Quranic Islamic schools, and, on the other hand, to successfully accommodate the preference to the public educational system shown by the minority members who selected. Such an accommodation is being pursued in parallel with courses aiming at preserving the linguistic and cultural characteristics of persons belonging to the minority who attend public schools. A 0.5% quota for the admission to universities and higher technical educational institutes of students who are members of the Muslim minority in Thrace has long been introduced in order to improve the access of minority students to the labor market. Unsurprisingly, such measures and trends are ignored by all those seeking to promote political agendas based on autonomous structures rather than integration with respect for diversity and interaction between the majority and the minority. Finally, in the current challenging economic situation, we will continue to seek further ways and means to meet the needs of the members of the Muslim minority and enhance their progress, prosperity, and well-being. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you for that. Next on the list is Austria. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I will speak in German.
Yes, this is in response to the mentioning of Austria today. I'd like to refer to yesterday's statement and once again emphasize that for decades now we've been a religion-friendly country where all recognized religious communities enjoy the same rights. We are an open society which believes in open communication. Mutual understanding, respect and acceptance of European value are an important precondition for successful life together. Thank you.
For that, Austria. And now it's Croatia. The floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is Marian Baric, Croatian Embassy to Poland. While being fully in line with the statement delivered by France on behalf of the EU, I would like to add a point in my national capacity and reply to a statement made by Mr. Mark Weitzman from Simon Wiesenthal Center. Regarding the memorial plaque in Jasenovac, which was moved on September the 7th to another location, Novska. Allow me to stress out that Croatia is looking for a legal and comprehensive solution to regulate use of symbols and signs of totalitarian systems. For that purpose and in accordance with government decision, the Council was already established and it is working on recommendation for finding integral legal solution. Croatian government strongly condemns all forms of hate crime and glorification of any totalitarian regime, and each individual case is thoroughly investigated and perpetrators are to be brought to justice. Each act that might qualify as the glorification of anti-Semitism is persecuted as public incitement to violence under criminal law. At the end, I would like to stress out once again that the Croatian government gives the utmost importance to the prevention of any form of hate crime and revitalization of unacceptable historical regimes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Next on the list is Hungary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. In my statement, I would like to react to the ones what was said our distinguished introducer with regard to the situation of anti-Semitism in Hungary. The Hungarian government is carrying out zero tolerance policy toward anti-Semitism. It's not laid down just in words, but turned it into actions. Since 2010, the government modified, among others, the criminal code and the House rules of the parliament to combat hate speech. The Parliament of Hungary declared the denial or trivialization of the Holocaust a crime punishable by up to 3 years imprisonment, and so far several judgments have been made on this basis. Parallel with this, the legislator created also the possibility for communities to defend their rights with a civil lawsuit. Also, I would like to evoke that last year Hungary chaired the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, which organization the introducer and also several participants mentioned. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. And the final right of reply goes to the Russian Federation. What's yours?
Thank you very much, moderator. I would like to take advantage of our right of reply to respond to what was said by the representative of Ukraine. I'd like to state to begin with that the picture that he has painted of the situation in the Russian Federation is so terrible that we really wonder what the limits to this extreme propaganda and misinformation of Ukraine is. The national heroes of Ukraine are Bandera and Shukevich, and I think everyone knows who they were. I mean, to celebrate the important dates of Nazi groups, I mean, that is intolerance and discrimination. Now, there is no immunity against crimes based on discrimination. I mean, you know, that can happen. We're not vaccinated against this. We're not vaccinated against this. It can happen. But we would call upon the Ukrainians when they prepare their statements to look at statistics to a greater extent. Insofar as the negative attitude of Ukrainians vis-à-vis Russia are concerned, the Ukrainian people are for us a fraternal people, even if Ukrainian leaders have prohibited us from saying such things. But, you know, those are the official authorities. I think that the negative approach of Russians is only vis-à-vis Ukrainian nationalists who are calling for the assassination of Russians and to be negative about Russians and all of this with the cover of the I mean, we still have a Ukraine hotel, we have a Kiev train station, so rather than criticizing us, we would call on the Ukrainian authorities to take a hard look at the rise of neo-Nazism in that country, and we would certainly be prepared to assist the Ukrainian authorities in taking the right steps to make sure that that occurs and that they respect all religious groups as well. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And now I'll give the floor to Ukraine, who's exercising its right to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. In reply to the statement of the Russian Federation, I would like to encourage my Russian colleague to listen more attentively to the statements of the Ukrainian delegation, because in my statement I clearly mentioned that the information that I provided to the participants based on the findings, factual findings, which are included in the alternative report on the implementation of the UN Convention on the elimination of all forms of racial discrimination by the Russian Federation. This report was prepared by several independent NGOs and submitted to the 93rd session of the UN Committee of CERD. And by the way, the Russian delegation also invited participants to look at the report presented within the framework of review of implementation by Russia of this UN convention. And also, I would like to tell that in the statement made at today's session, the delegation of Ukraine informed only about the situation in Russia. I didn't mention about the very dangerous trend of export of all these challenges and of aggressive nationalism and violent extremism and xenophobia to other countries. Thank you.
Thank you for that. With that contribution, we've closed, that ends the contribution from the floor. I would like to now turn the floor over to our two introducers, starting with Mr. Mark Weitzman, to respond and to give us some kind of concluding remarks based on what he's heard here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I'd like to begin by thanking the distinguished representatives of Croatia and Hungary for their comments. I'm glad and have spoken about the positive steps that are being taken in both those countries. And I will just note that the unfortunate part was that the steps had to be taken in reaction to actions that precipitated and caused the necessity for taking those steps. But nonetheless, anything positive is welcome and in the right direction. It is clear from listening very closely to the comments here that there is, in a sense, two themes that seem to be predominating to me as I was listening. One is the sense of the power and the importance of the role in government in both formal and informal education. And that is the emphasis, I think, that comes out in many ways, both positive and negative. Government as a form of encouraging, providing power to education, or building a bridge of understanding, as was described, but also government as perhaps oppressing or misleading education in different ways. And I think that what we see here is the emphasis on the necessity for government to realize that the power that it has to influence minds and create the atmosphere that is prevalent on the ground, that has the impact on people's direct lives, is extremely important and extremely necessary to face up to. And I would stress as well that while we're talking in a sense about formal and even informal education, which is a division in and of itself, I think one of the things that also has come through is the role of government and leadership in general on what I would call public education, in creating a general atmosphere that has the influence, the tone that is set in society in general, and can help shape the direction in which government moves forward in the role of education. The next part was as well the increasing and increased, it has been going on for a long time, but the difficulties and tension connected to the role of education about religion in general, and particularly in terms of religious minorities. And in that, I would just like to mention, and with this I'll conclude, is that my organization, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, yesterday had a conference in our headquarters in Los Angeles where we introduced a document called the Bahrain Declaration, which was authored in essence by the King of Bahrain and brought together a group of Muslim, Christian, and Jewish leaders as well as representatives of civil society. In a declaration that we're hoping will get widespread acceptance. And the declaration declares that when, for example, I'll just highlight a couple of points. When extremist clergy preach hatred, violence, and seek to sow the seeds of discord, they are dissenting and differing from the word of, it's a desecration of the name of God. They recognize the freedom of choice and condemn compelled observance of any kind. We call upon everyone to accept the power of self-determination, the discouragement of extremism, as well as the role of, I'm going to just make this a little larger here. Pardon me for a minute. But the role of, I'm sorry, the rejection of the sowing of terror, the encouragement of extremism, radicalization, suicide bombing, promotion of the abuse of women and children must all be rejected. And finally, in terms of education, we pledge to teach our children and to demonstrate to them by example, and I think that is crucial, that is not just the declarations, but the actions, the examples that must be set to create a model for education, both in religious terms, for believers, and as well for secularists, the role of example to set a model to create a better world moving forward, which is in a sense what I think the education that we're talking about here is trying to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Weitzman. And I'll give the final word to Ms. Soye.
Thank you very much. And I'll start with saying that it's been a real privilege to be part of this afternoon session. Lots of food for thought. I'm going to focus again sort of on the techniques and approaches that people brought out about how we can conduct this education effectively. When Serbia spoke about the importance of this education taking place from preschool through to university level, and this is absolutely vital. It's sometimes considered that young children don't notice difference, and so we shouldn't talk about issues of religion or culture with very young children, but actually evidence shows that children as young as 2 are using racial and religious markers to start categorizing people. And as we all know, young people are full of children, and if they're shushed or questions are left unanswered, then they can often come to perhaps their own wrong conclusions, that perhaps that it's wrong to be different. Another speaker spoke about inner conflict in those who discriminate, which again I think re-emphasizes the importance of safe spaces and participatory learning. You know, humans are inclined to confirmation bias. We reject info that conflicts with our worldview, and if we feel threatened, we actually hold on to our views more tightly. So we need to equip young children to feel safe to go on their own journeys, to be able to let go of stereotypes and prejudice. A couple of speakers spoke about the role of youth as protagonists of change. And again, this is absolutely vital. Research shows that young people are more likely to take on ideas when they're presented by other young people as they speak in words they understand. And people are more likely to listen to those who they perceive to be similar to themselves. And indeed, where young people are empowered to be active citizens, it reduces that sense of futility and despair that many targets of prejudice feel. I spoke earlier about young Muslims feeling that this intolerance and discrimination is normalized and nothing can be done about it. Pupil voice can reduce this. Another speaker spoke about historical literacy as key to promoting equality, which shows the importance that schools are conducting this work across the curriculum, not just as an add-on, but a whole school approach, considering the resources that we use, the way in which food is provided, the way in which parents and carers and families are engaged with. And finally, as Mark's already alluded to, of course, many speakers have spoken about structural discrimination. And this demonstrates how important it is that the micro is linked up with the macro. Focusing on young people's attitudes and behaviours is going to achieve nothing where young people are being discriminated against or excluded by the powers that be. So it all needs to take a joined up approach to create settings where all of our young people feel safe and included and able to achieve.
Okay, so thank you for that. And now I'd like to give the floor to the chairmanship in office to give us a final synopsis of the whole week in a sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just shortly, as we're coming to a close of the first week of this year's Human Dimension implementation meeting, I would like to say a few words in my capacity as head of the task force of the Austrian OSCE Chairmanship 2017. Over the last 5 days, we have covered a wide range of issues in the human dimension of the OSCE. We started the week off with our high-level panel discussion on key issues that threaten the human dimension in the OSCE region, where we heard a number of recommendations on how the OSCE could and should respond to preserve and promote human rights overall, and as an integral part of our security agenda. That afternoon, and over the following few days, we discussed issues ranging from freedom of the media and freedom of expression to freedom of assembly and association, national human rights institutions, the role of civil society, democracy and democratic elections, equal participation in political and public life, freedom of thought, conscience, religions or belief, and finally, a number of topics under the broad title of tolerance and non-discrimination. In all these sessions, we observed vibrant discussions and sobering insights into the overall human rights situation across the OSCE region. Here, I would recall one of the key messages that echoed across the halls throughout these days. I quote, "All of us, governments, international organizations, civil society, or generally all people need to come together to jointly guarantee that our universal human rights are protected and enjoyed for each and every one of us." End of quote. It would be remiss, however, if I do not mention here that we have also heard some statements in the last day or two in particular, which were not aimed to preserve our OSCE principles and unanimously adopted commitments on human rights and fundamental freedoms. To this, I would say that we should all uphold the principles of tolerance and show respect and understanding for one another. Since the signing of the Helsinki Final Act in 1975, the OSCE participating states have adopted a wealth of commitments in the area of human rights over the years. We must preserve them if we want to live in a peaceful, harmonious, safe, and secure societies. With that message, we hope to see the vibrant and lively discussions in the second week continue, with positive messages on how we can move forward and improve the implementation of our human rights commitments across the OSCE region. Finally, on behalf of the chairmanship, and I hope I can also speak on behalf of all participants here, in conveying our sincerest gratitude to the ODIHR director and her entire staff, who have worked tirelessly to make sure this meeting can take place in a respectful and meaningful manner. A special thank you to all the introducers and to the moderators for their very able and objective steering of the sessions. This was not always an easy task. Thank you also to the rapporteurs, note takers and interpreters working behind the scenes. And finally, thank you all, especially civil society representatives, for coming to Warsaw and pushing us to uphold our commitments. Enjoy this evening, enjoy the weekend, thank some fresh air and good mood, and I wish you all the best for the next week. Thank you very much.